Africa wants. This is how Africa can get what we want. These are the challenges, but they can only be addressed if Africa decided to have a common voice and address the divisions that they face. And these divisions can only be addressed when we establish a platform to start saying we have got a common position, a common agenda for the future of the continent. And that future that we should be talking about is how to harness these particular debates for Africa's socioeconomic transformation. But there cannot be socioeconomic transformation without also thinking about transformation of our governance and governance systems. There is no single country in Africa today that we can say it's stable democratically. Maybe we can talk about Mauritius, Cape Verde, and a few others. But there is a lot of discomfort on the governance models we have in Africa. And it's those particular governance models that we have in Africa that are preventing this collective harnessing of responsibilities and voice in order to make Africa a better place and transform the continent. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Professor Kanyinga. I would invite on Zoom to join us. Are we ready? Dr. Tendai Murisa, the Executive Director of the Civil Institute, Harare, Zimbabwe, will be engaging the innovative ways that sectors can play to advance energy and climate justice in Africa. And straight away after that, we'll move into a brief moderated panel where we'll engage some of the topical themes on the program and then take questions after that as we round up. We are watching our time. Thank you very much. Dr. Murisa, please. Yes. Can we see him, please? Excellent. We can see and hear you. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, good morning, colleagues. So far the discussion has been very exciting. Thanks to the African Development for hosting such an important assembly and also to Dukes Transnational. So I think from what former panelists have presented, we can just summarize around key issues or the context in which we're living in. I see three that have come up: the issue around insecurity, fragility, and uncertainty.
put our hands together for him. Thank you. That was excellent, and you really did a great job disaggregating the data, pointing to the sections we should look at in terms of agency. That helps us segue right away to the next portion of the program, which is a moderated discussion. Now, because of time, we'll make that shortened and probably take 2 minutes with each panelist so that we can invite our audience to discuss with us by way of your questions. And what we'll do is we'll probably take our questions as one, as probably an A part and a B part. How do we rethink governance? And then how do we draw fundamental lines of equity, agency, and ownership for stakeholders in Africa? I'll come and join us, but we will start with Professor Adebayo Olugoshi. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very big question, and it's one which I think practically all of us here have been debating for a while. I want to align myself with Karuti Kayinga's proposition that it does not make sense for us to talk about rethinking development if we are not going to rethink governance. Actually, I belong to a school of thought that says that the starting point for us in Africa, even on issues of climate, whatever you take, is to get the politics right. If we do not get the politics right, we are not going anywhere. And it's a framework which enables us to begin to think about issues of vision. Where do we want to go as a people? What's our destination? How do we get there? And what are the kinds of resources that we must mobilize in order to get there? Now, if we do not get that basic framework right, we are simply going to be an experimental field. And this continent has been a site of experimentation non-stop for 60 years, including experiments which are going on in the name of just transition and climate. All kinds of schemes are invented every time in order to convince us that something might work, but things which actually are not being tried by other people. It's a case of do as I say, not as I do. As we talk about just transitions, we see, for example, that the European Union is adopting a framework in which imports coming from other regions of the world will be assessed on the basis of their greenness. If that is not a trade barrier strategy, somebody should tell me what it is. So that on the one hand, you are talking about climate justice, but in the name of climate justice, a plethora of injustices are also being played out, reinforcing a structure of relationship in the international system, of power relationship and a hierarchy of development, which basically keeps us at the bottom of the ladder at the end of the day. And that's the point which Tendai was also emphasizing. So it's important, I think, Dr. Edika Kalu, that we simply step back from a lot of these conversations. It's my plea that, first of all, let's have a serious conversation. Where is the shoe pinching us? And from there, we begin to build up. What does climate justice mean from our point of view? And I'm not taking it for granted that the answer that comes out of Kenya will be the same thing as the answer that necessarily comes out from South Africa. But at least let's have that conversation and see where our meeting points are so that we can then approach international negotiations on the basis of a clear-headed set of proposals, not on the basis of a bowl in our hands waiting for somebody to drop manna into our bowl. Now, nowadays, there's talk about climate justice and debt justice, right? The ADB has warned actually in a recent publication that African countries must be extremely careful about trading external debt for so-called climate justice-related kinds of initiatives, in which you cede an entire forest to a debt holder in the name of debt forgiveness of a portion of your debt, knowing that actually in another year you are going to owe more than you owed before you went into such a scheme. We are never going to get out of it. It's a vicious cycle. And that's why activists, for example, are saying, well, there can be no climate justice if there's no debt justice. And debt justice means a complete reformation of the international development architecture, and with it, the international governance architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Olukoshi. I will invite Professor Murisa again, if you can join us on Zoom and let us know your thoughts on rethinking governance. You have said a bit to that, and we just want your 1 minute conclusion before we begin to invite questions. Thank you very much for that succinct intervention. Ambassador Njaye, please, could you let us know your thoughts on rethinking governance to harness Africa's renewable energy, especially from experience with insecurity?
I think on the governance issue, I will add two things to what the previous speaker said. I think there is the necessity, and I think it's an imperative, we must say, to build strong institutions. I said that, and if you relate that to climate finance, many of our government today cannot access finance because of lack of institutions that are trained properly to have the understanding, but also the discussion, the right discussion during negotiations. The second one for me is agency. Agency, why? Because I think Professor Karuki mentioned earlier common African position. I think in this debate, it's very important for Africa to come up with a common African position. There was one at the beginning of the climate discussion, a very strong one that has gone through a lengthy process of discussion in the different sub-region of Africa. And then it disappeared little by little because countries then come up later on during the different phase of the COPs with their own interest, national interest. So, and I think we began to lose the momentum as the Africa group to be able to say on climate finance, this is what we want. and lost and damages, this is exactly what Africa wants, and then begin within the regional institution to discuss how to deal with that. And I think for me, those are the two key issues. Yes, resource mobilization is important, domestic resource mobilization, but also in strong institutions to be able to actually accompany this process towards sustainability. But the agency is everything that we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thinking about agency and the space to negotiate that, we'll move to Professor Kanyinga. We would like to know your thoughts on the role of stakeholders as we move forward in addressing climate and insecurity.
Yeah, thank you very much. Even before we speak about stakeholders, let me point out that even as we speak about crisis that we face today and issues of climate justice, we look across Africa, a continent that wouldn't be conflicted in how to harness solar and electrify the entire of the continent. But there is no single country in Africa where we can say that their power sector doesn't have a problem. Go to South Africa, I think you get a real crisis with load shedding. Go to Kenya, here is the same. Go to Nigeria, in a country producing fuel. I mean, where fuel shouldn't be a problem, but it's a crisis. It's a country of generators in every city you go to. This is brought about by the governance question that I was alluding to from the very beginning, with that we must get our governance right in order to create the necessary conditions for development to address these particular teething challenges. And this can only be got right if we started saying that governments, civil society organizations, and the private businesses need to get their act together and start working in unison, working together in order to have a common position on some of these particular issues. Unfortunately, the governments across Africa treat civil society as an enemy or a separate entity. Private businesses don't want to touch government because of predatory behavior. Governments are seen as completely not interested in this, and for good reasons, because governments seem not to be running an agenda for the African society. So Africa is left in a very contradictory position, running agendas set by others, when we have got a lot of disconnections and a lot of incoherence in even what we should be doing for a common future. We must get our act together, and there is no other right way of getting the act together than saying this is the time Africa needs to have civil society, private businesses, and African governments thinking about the future as one, rather than disconnected and having a lot of incoherence in what is happening. There is no shortcut to this. Otherwise, we shall be experimentation, as Mbayo has said. We are a continent of experiments. It's not long time ago when there was a debate on good governance. They said Africa cannot even have good governance. Let them have good enough. Right? Now they are saying Africa has not developed. Let's have policies that can help Africa to leapfrog. Right? We need to get our act together. Otherwise, we shall continue leapfrogging before one thing is concluded. After climate justice, something else is going to come in a few years' time, and Africa will be caught again and prepared.
Thank you very much, Professor Kanyinga. Thank you. I just want to go back again to, first of all, say thank you to our excellent panelists and such, very thought-provoking interventions that we could spend all day going through the details. We look forward to having more conversations to really flesh out these points that we have surfaced in this conversation so far. Because time is not on our side, unfortunately, we would have to round up as we go into the question section from the audience. Thank you so much for your engagement so far. Thinking about what we have heard so far and the reason and the theme for this convening, I would really invite us to ask questions that will help us come up with recommendations and conclusions as we round up this session that will really be useful to Africa and help the rest of the world from a global perspective engage properly, thinking about some of the points the panelists have made from a local framework or a global perspective that will really be useful to Africa. The microphones will be going round, and if you have a question, please raise your hand. What we'll do is we'll take it in 2 sets. We'll take a first set of questions, and then our panelists will take about a minute each to, address it. And then we'll take the second round because of time. Thank you very much. Please introduce yourself and your affiliation briefly, and yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate the panelists for a good, brief discussion that we have had. I have 2 issues. One, I need to look at the issue of biodiversity, and there's a lot of discussion about funding the same and all that, but I'm a valuer by training. I work with Peace with Land Kenya, and I've engaged in valuation of biodiversity, and what I've noticed with governments is that they peg it on the budget. So you are pushed to agree on a certain budget, which is already predetermined, so that you don't go beyond the budget. So we need to look at how do we push beyond the budget in terms of compensating for the losses in the biodiversity. So I need to hear what the panelists have to say about that. Number 2, as a land expert and having been involved in doing land policies both in Kenya and South Sudan, I have seen financiers come to pressure us to have policies. Good example is the national land policy for this country of Kenya. And we were being funded then as a member of the Institution of Surveyors of Kenya by external bodies. They pushed us to the point that we had the national land policy. And after that, they all left. We were left with a policy with a number of gaps that up to today, I've heard one of the speakers talk about communities being involved in the trading. One of the laws that we have called Community Land Act not being actualized in this country. And the reason is that the financiers also left. They did not follow the policy that we did to the end to ensure that it's implemented, even a quarter of it. So they were happy that we have policies in Africa that address land issues, and they left. And we will get new financiers, for example, coming in to change the policy that we have already made. So why are the financiers not moving with us up to implementation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can take 2 more questions before we go to the next round. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning. I'm John Ouko, final year student at the University of Nairobi. I've got a question, and it is based on just 3 beliefs that I have, that Africa contributes the least, but have suffered greatly as far as climate change is concerned. And we're also coming to agreement that something should be done about it to bring a corrective change, especially in the continent of Africa. And that climate change also needs resources apart from the domestic resources that are available. And I'm glad that Dr. Ntab brought about 4 points that will achieve, or rather some 4 solutions to the issues that we have been talking about. So my question is, I would love to clearly hear about how the African government can have a balance in the place of discussion of climate financing, so that we can have a collective voice over this issue of energy transition, because we are admitting that there is a challenge in Africa.
Sorry, we would like the questions to be succinct, if you don't mind. We have 30 seconds for each question so that the panelists can respond, if you will excuse me. So please round up the question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm done. It is just that clear.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, there's one more person, and then we'll come to the next round. We're trying to save time so that more people can get a chance to express themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dube from the Infrastructure Development Bank in Zimbabwe. Just a quick question. So I like the discussion on governance and how governance contributes to issues of climate, but I just wanted to understand, CSOs generally usually push for democracy. I wanted to understand if it is working, your perspective. And we always discuss the governance frameworks, and we do not know how to govern things in Africa. Do we have light of what such a governance framework could look like, if it is something that would work for us? Are we saying we do not know how to organize ourselves and finance ourselves? Because it's a long-standing issue that we always speak of. But do we know exactly what the correct one looks like?
Thank you very much. So we'll start with Professor Lukoshi, please. If you may address the three questions that have been raised as best as we can, and so we can move forward.
I'll just take one little slice on, which is the last one, on democracy and whether it is working. Your verdict is as relevant as mine, I think, in this matter. What I think I can say, and having worked with an institute that covered democracy across Africa and the Middle East, is that there is a considerable amount of discontent on our continent. Scholars have tried to understand this in terms of what we describe as democratic backsliding. My critique is that when we started the transitions in the 1990s towards a liberalization of the political space, there was too little imagination that went into our effort. There was a lot of activism for change, but too little imagination on what the content of that change would be beyond form, beyond form. So we wanted multi-partyism to be reintroduced. We wanted an end to life presidencies and an imposition of term limitations. We wanted independent electoral commissions and so on and so forth. And we got most of it. But at the end of the day, elections have become an exercise in voting without choosing, of a choicelessness, and in which, in country after country, as you vote in and vote out governments, the government you voted out, which you thought was a horrible government, turns out to be better than the government that you voted in. Okay, that's the situation. And I'm arguing that at the heart of it is what increasingly we refer to as the absence of a clear developmental vision. Nobody builds a governance system in the abstract, and least of all on the basis of a copycat mentality. You first of all must define where you want to be. What kind of country do you want to be? Where will Kenya be in 50 years? What do we have as ambitions for ourselves? And on that basis, what kinds of systems of governance do we put in place? What institutions are relevant and matter? It's a huge contemporary field, as you know, and there is a lot of work going on rethinking development and democracy on the continent. Some people are calling for a return to indigenous systems. My answer to them is that what we describe as the traditional, in a lot of cases, is actually itself as modern, as modernity itself. So that's not an easy path to follow. What is important is not thinking of today, but of tomorrow. Down the line, where are we going and how do we get there? If systems don't work for us that we have put in place, they should be discarded. But the developmental purpose at the end of the day that ensures that the true meaning of democracy, which is empowered citizens able to participate and to be represented effectively is instituted in our countries. I can spend a whole day on this, but let me stop. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to invite Dr. Murisa. Could you please address any of the questions as you're following on Zoom? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer to the land question. And we could speak some more to that, but Ambassador Njai, what are your thoughts on the questions around development and those our participants have posed?
Well, I think on the question on governance and democracy, I think Professor Olokoche has responded very well. That's a debate that is currently on the table, and I think we need another side events of a day or 2 days to actually discuss that topic. I perhaps would like to come back to the issue of biodiversity, and I think one of the participants mentioned the financing. I'm not going to touch the financing because I think there are a couple of solutions to biodiversity. I serve in a country that actually has the largest rainforest, the second largest rainforest, and the second lung of humanity today. It's the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And some of the solution to preserving biodiversity and funding also that you mentioned, I think comes mainly from local solutions. I think the local solutions are easier to implement. Right. I'm not saying that we have to look at to overlook the macro effect of preserving biodiversity, but I think I mentioned a couple of those local, what I call the nature-based solutions that provide usually opportunity to involve local communities in preserving their environment. And I think a couple of the examples that we have today are those ecotourism villages that we have mainly in Central Africa. We are not very good in West Africa in ecotourism, but I think people are making headways in those nature-based solution. And what it does is it creates at local level the involvement of the community, but also it helps improve their livelihood because they are part of the management of that. It generates resources, and those resources are reinvested actually to preserve the biodiversity of those areas. So I think we need to also not just look at big funding, but make sure that we have solutions that generate income generating resources, activities, sorry, particularly in countries that have a very large biodiversity. I think those local solutions involving communities are very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. That may not have, that may have captured a large part of your question, but Dr. Kanyinga, please could you speak some more to the questions before we take a second round, if we can afford one or two?
Let me just respond also to the land question in a very brief manner. There is a mistake we make on the African continent by treating the land question as if it's a land question on its own. Land ownership is a democratic question. And if you want to see whether any society in an agrarian context is developed and democratic, you have got to see how land is held and how land is concentrated. Because if there is lack of democratic order in any particular society, even inequalities in terms of ownership of land reflect the nature of that particular land ownership and society. So there's nothing wrong with donors coming and helping you to do your land policies. It's because we don't understand what is land. Land ownership is about a democratic question. And it's an expression of power relations in the society. The more undemocratic a society is, the more inequalities in land ownership. And therefore, if you have got a land ownership that does not speak to the structure of governance in any particular context, where you give power to communities in terms of land ownership, you don't progress. And that's what is facing, those are the challenges facing Community Land Act in the country today. How democratic are you to think about democratizing the land ownership and land processes in your country? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kanyinga. I think this is the toughest part of me for this event, to say it's time to go, as much as I would have loved to take a few more questions. But this is what I would ask. We have a rapporteur and we have representatives in the room. We would like to take these questions because, like we said in the beginning, this is the beginning of a conversation, and these are experts, not just from academia and research, but practitioners in the field for decades. So there's a lot of thoughts here to not just be digested, but that is useful for policy impact and implementation, like some of us have surfaced from our questions. That means we'll be putting these thoughts in writing and coming up with products that will be useful. To that end, we would really request your contribution. So what we would like for you to do is send an email. Lydia will make the email address available now, and we'll project it as we end the session. Please, we would like you to send an email with your questions and your thoughts, because it will be useful. We'll go back and look at them and we'll address them. So we are not leaving it open-ended. You'll get feedback, and hopefully we'd like to keep engaging. So that said, I thank you very much for coming, and we'll take one closing remark from Professor Olukoshi as we round up the session. Professor, please. Thank you.
I think you ended it on a very good note. It would be a bit, to go back to substantive issues. But on the issue of land, I thought it was also useful. And you may have been referring to the schemes that the likes of Hernando de Soto came to implement. For a long time, he was implanted in this region of the continent on behalf of the World Bank, basically on the agenda of land titling, ensuring that the land regime was reformed in a direction in which people take titles on the argument that titling will unlock finance. In fact, what titling has unlocked is dispossession. Communities finding themselves dispossessed of land, because in any case, financing comes on terms that are not sustainable, and in the end, the land you have used as collateral is collected by the people who gave you the resources in the first place. And that has been the experience altogether. I would suggest that you also look at the Land Commission report, if you haven't seen it, that was produced by Issa Shivji for Tanzania, Professor Issa Shivji. It was commissioned by the government of Tanzania in the context, in the wake of the failings that were associated with the Hernando de Soto World Bank reforms and an attempt to recalibrate land policy for that country. So that's what I wanted to say. Just also to thank Dukes Transnational on behalf of all of us panelists, and also thank you for your participation. We'll be hanging around for a few minutes once we are out of this room, so we can still talk to a few of you who might have questions. But thank you very much. Thank you, Cecilia.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Murisa. Thank you so much, Dr. Kanyinga, and Your Excellency, ma'am. Thank you for joining us. And I really want to thank every one of you that took time this early morning to join us so early to have this conversation. We thank you for the privilege of your time and engagement. Join us to have, the corridor conversation before we go, and breakfast and tea before you leave. Thank you. Please.